Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card is a personalized card for the personalized challenge for February. When you pull the tab, these bears flip over and it's a waterfall card. So here is the full card. It's just a regular card, but on the front there's a sun at the bottom. There's a little sign that says pull, and as you pull, it spells out the letters of the person's name. In my case, this is for Rebecca, and each bear is holding a different letter and have some washi tape there so that you get a nice decorative pull out, and then you just slide it back in to flip the bears back over. And it's actually not a very hard card to make. I did it as my Christmas card last year in 2015. So here are the Neat and Tangled Journaling Alpha dies, and I'm going to use those. And I've got my All Inside stamp set and matching die set by Ellen Hudson. I'm going to start off by taking the strip that's going to flip the bears, and this is 5/8 of an inch by 12 inch. So I cut it out of a piece of 12 by 12 cardstock. Now I'm going to score this for every letter. So I have 7 letters, so I'm going to score it 7 times. And I did 5/8 of an inch between each score, so between each bear. When I did this card with 6 letters, I used 3/4 of an inch. So you just sort of have to adjust a little bit. So if you were doing 5 letters, you could probably go 7/8 of an inch. And you have a little bit more length between them as you have fewer letters. So to make sure I have a segment for each letter that I'm going to place down. And then you can see I'm just going to fold these and use my bone folder to get it nice and crisp. And I'm going to fold them all toward the inside. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Just going to make sure that I get them all folded down and creased down. So you'll have the same number of creases as you have letters. So once I get this all folded, you'll see it kind of looks like a giant P. So I have this long strip and then all of my creases. Now put that off to the side. I'm going to work on my card base. This is 8.5 by 11 and I cut a 6-inch piece. So I discarded the 5-inch piece because it's 8.5 by 11, and I'm going to fold it vertically. So I'm going to mark this, well, I have it at 6 inches. I'm going to score it at 3 inches, and this is going to be a very long card, and I'm keeping the full 8.5 inches here because I'm not sure exactly how much to cut. Because the first time I did this, I had 6 letters, now I have 7, so just to be safe, I'm going to use the full length and cut it off later. For my front panel, I'm going to clear emboss it with this hand-drawn hearts stamp, background stamp by Simon Says Stamp. Now this is a 6-inch high stamp, so I'm going to measure my cardstock from the top 5 3/4, so I just want it a little less than the length of the heart stamp, and I'm marking the back of my card, but I'm actually stamping the front, and I'll show you why here. But first I'm going to ink up my stamp with my Versamark ink, and then when I take my card, I'm going to make sure that I'm stamping the front so I can see my guidelines on the bottom here in the back. And I'm going to line up my guidelines with the very bottom of the stamp. And I know that the stamp ends at the bottom with full-size hearts and it starts at the top with full-size hearts. So I'm going to use that to my advantage. All right, so I'm going to make sure I get a nice good impression with this Versamark ink. And then I'll flip it over and I'm going to sprinkle it with some clear embossing powder. It's a really pretty tone on tone. This is Surf Blue by Simon Says Stamp, this paper. Now because I pressed really hard on the edge, I got some Versamark ink on it, but I just brushed off my embossing powder with a little brush. And now what I'm going to do is ink up my stamp again, but I really just need the top inked up. And now I'm going to take those same guidelines, and rather than stamping the top, now I'm stamping the bottom of my card. And those guidelines are exactly where I stopped the first time that I stamped, when I stamped the top portion of this card. So if you ever have to stamp something longer than the length of your actual stamp, and it's a nice repeatable pattern, this is a really easy way to kind of continue your stamp beyond where the stamp ends. So I'll sprinkle that with some clear embossing powder and heat it to set it, and you would never know that my stamp wasn't the full size of the cardstock. I'm going to use one of my favorite die sets, this Landscape Trio by Mama Elephant. It's just some stitched hills, and I have a piece of green apple cardstock by Simon Says Stamp. It's just a scrap piece that I had, and I just die cut that top, and then I'm going to cut this to 3 inches wide and about 2.5 or so inches tall. And I'm going to place this at the bottom of my card, but not yet because I'm not sure exactly where to place it. I'm going to start working on my bear. So I'm going to stamp this bear on Nina Solar White cardstock with Memento Tuxedo Black ink. And I'm also going to stamp my sun. I stamped one extra bear because I kind of messed up on one of them. I only need 7. Now because I'm coloring a lot of bears here, I'm going to make this really simple. I'm going to take E31 and I'm going to color all the way around the edge and part of the ears with a thick line, and then I'll color right on top and below the arms because you'll get a shadow kind of where it curves downward and then also behind the arm. Now I'm taking E30 and I'm creating a head, and so I'm just literally covering everything except for these white spots on his belly. So I'm really making sure that I get a nice blend on the edge and leaving just these white circles. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to take my Zero Colorless blender and I'm just going to go over the edge of that E30 just to make it nice and soft, and it looks kind of a little fluffy. And I noticed that his head was just a little bit too small at the top. You see there's not really enough E30, so I just grabbed my E30, I added a little bit more color there, and then I blended it out with the Zero to finish it off. And so I did all the bears exactly like this. Now you could get fancier, you can get more color, you could texturize it with some, like a piece of terry cloth or something like that, but I wanted to make this pretty simple. I forgot to turn on my camera when I colored the sun, so I stamped it again so I could show you. I'm just covering the whole thing with Y11. It's a really light pale yellow. And then I'm going to take my Y17, which is actually the darkest, and I'm going to color over that circle so that I get a little bit inside the circle and a little bit outside the circle. And that kind of makes it look like it's a little rounder. And then I'll take the Y15, which is my medium color, and I'll blend that out toward the light on both the inside and on the outside. It gets a little tricky. You want to be careful because the die will leave a little bit of a white outline, so I'm trying to really stay in the lines here. And then I took my Y11 again and blended all those together until it was nice and smooth on all the points and also on the inside. Now for those little rounded cheeks, I took the Y17, my dark color, and I drew just a little bit of color in the lower left-hand portion of the circle, and then I went back in with my Y11 and blended that out. So that is all my coloring, and now it's time to cut it out. Now this die is a solid die, so I keep a negative in my die set, and you'll see why. So what I'm going to do is take, and actually I'll grab my surgical tape, get a piece ready to go. I'm just going to put it right here on my craft mat. I'm going to take my negative, I'm going to place it right over my bear so that it is perfectly on top. I have the same amount of white on all edges. And then I'm going to take my die and I'm going to kind of move it around until it hits right in that groove. And when it doesn't move anymore, see I'm moving it and it's not budging, then I know it's right there exactly in the hole. And so I'm going to put my surgical tape over the die, the negative, and the base piece that I'm cutting. So you can see when I pull this all apart here, I'm going to take my paper piercer and poke the holes in the back to get it out. And you'll see that I get a perfect white line all the way around. So this is a great trick to use for any solid dies that you have. So here's everything cut out, all my bears, my sun. I also die cut my letters, and I also have white bears that I cut out of just some Nina cardstock because I'm going to need to cover up those Copic colors on the backs of those bears. Now first I'm going to color my letters. I'm going to do them in rainbow colors. I'm just going to show you one here. Now you could color this with ink, with a sponge dauber. You can do direct to paper ink. You can use water-based markers. I mean, you can pretty much use anything here to color these. I just use Copic markers because it's just really easy to do. So I just put it on a piece of white scratch paper and I'm just going to color all over. Now this is pretty easy. I don't really need to show you how I colored this, but I thought I would hold up the color so you can see, and then you can just pause it here, and I'll also have them listed on my blog post. So now I'm going to adhere my letters to my bear. So I'm going to hold it with my tweezers and put some 2A glue on the back. And then I'm going to take this and kind of put my thumb underneath his arms to pull them up a little bit so that I can slide my letter in. And because I'm using liquid glue, I can move it around a little bit so that it's showing enough to where you can tell which letter it is. So I'm just going to move it around a little bit with my tweezers, and I angled it to the left, and then some of them I angled to the right, and some of them are straight up, so I made them all a little bit different. So here they are all completed. I did them all the exact same way, same technique. All right, so now I need to put some white on the back of these bears because they're not very pretty on the back. So I'm going to put some Tombow Mono multi-glue, not too much because you do not want it seeping out the sides. This die is not perfectly symmetrical, so you want to face them in the same direction. It doesn't really matter, nobody's really paying attention to the back. But just put it on top and then squeeze it together and hold it for a few seconds and just make sure that they line up. And you're going to glue that arm so it shouldn't pop out at all. Now, I did that for all of them, and now I'm using my Altenew UR set. I want a sentiment behind the sun, so I chose a small one. It says "You are amazing," and I'm going to stack it vertically. So I covered up the UR and inked up my amazing, and I'm going to stamp it at the bottom here in the center. And then I covered up the amazing and inked up the UR and put it right there on top. Now it's time to adhere the bears to the strip. So I'm going to use some Tombow Mono multi-glue, and I'm going to use it very sparingly because you really don't need that much of this glue. And so you're going to put some at the top, but make sure you leave a gap because it's not going to be, the bear's not going to be all the way at the top. And the reason for that is you want to make sure that the ears do not go past the crease. So it should be completely flat at the top here because otherwise the ears will get in the way when you try to flip them over. So I'm going to stack these up, so a little bit of Tombow right there in the middle of my segment, and then press my bear right on there, just making sure it's a little bit below the crease, and also making sure that I center my bear so that they all stack on top of one another. And I found that this really wasn't too bulky because even though there's a lot of pieces, they're not stacked directly on top of one another. All right, so I've got my last one right below the top crease. And so now you can see how this lays nicely on top of my strip. The next thing I'm going to do is adhere my bottom bear to the grass because he's the only bear that's not going to move. So I'm going to secure him to something that's attached to the card base. So I mark the center to make sure that I get him right there in the middle, and I'm going to put some glue just on the bottom half. And since I've already glued my bears to the strip, it's a little tricky to kind of see where I'm putting this. So I decided to just sort of hold it up, and it was easiest to do it that way. So I'm just going to leave some space between him and the sentiment and center him right on that pencil mark that I made. And then I'm just going to press it down to make sure that he's nice and secure on the grass. All right, now I can try this out to see if it works, and so I'm just going to kind of hold my grass and pull, and everything seems to be working fine. And I pulled it all the way out so that I could see how much of my strip is going to show, and I want to cover this. I want to make it a little bit more decorative. So I'm going to take this piece of washi tape, and I can see I need to go a little bit above the first bear. And so I'm going to cover that with my washi tape, and notice that my washi tape is also 5/8 of an inch, and that's kind of why I cut my strip to 5/8 of an inch. So if you're going to use washi tape that's larger or thinner, then you should adjust your strip to be that same size. All right, so now I can see how it pulls out and it goes all the way with the rainbow the entire way. Okay, so now I'm going to adhere my grass to the card base. I put some Scotch foam tape on the bottom, and now I'm just going to measure. I'm going to put it at the top so that my bear isn't quite to the top of my card. And now I can see how long my card needs to be. So now I can take my pencil and just mark the bottom of my grass, and that's where I'm going to trim my card base. So I'm just going to run that through my Fiskars trimmer, and then I'll peel off my Scotch foam tape. Make sure that my strip is right there between the Scotch foam tape, and then I'll just put it right there in the bottom portion of my card base, and it should line up perfectly. Everything should measure right because I marked it beforehand. Okay, so now I can see that this is all working, and it freely moves in between the two pieces of Scotch foam tape that's holding that grass to the card, and that's all that's holding these bears to the base. My son is going to be my pull tab, and I want him about half on, half off the card. So I can see I need to trim out the bottom a little bit because I don't want it showing past the sun. So I did a little trial and error here, trimmed off a little bit until I got it perfect. And then I'm going to take a piece of Scotch foam tape, and I cut it with a scissors so I had a nice edge, and I just put it right on top of that exposed strip. Which should be through your grass piece. And so once I get that on, I want to make sure that everything is flat and centered. So I'll peel off the backing, and then I'll take my sun and I'm going to make sure that it's half on, half off, and just kind of position it right over the sentiment and make sure that it covers it. And then once I get it in the middle, then I can press down. And it will adhere. The Scotch foam tape is really sticky. So now I can pull it and my sentiment will be revealed, and I'll have this rainbow, and then the bears will flip over. Now, I think people always need instruction on how to do this, even though it may seem obvious to us. So I just went ahead and took my 0.3 Copic multi-liner and wrote the word pull and put a little arrow there so people would know, well, Rebecca will know what to do. So here is the final card. You can see I just pull this nice and easy, and it just slides right out, and each bear flips over with a letter for her name, and then it stops right at the last bear. And I get this nice pretty rainbow that pulls out, and then I can just push it back in and all the bears flip back over. This is such a fun card to make, and when you're making it for someone special, it's just so much more worthwhile, and it's really fun to take the time to make it, especially for one person. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you'll enter the challenge. I'm looking forward to see what you come up with, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.